Welcome to the Sacred Healing Podcast, where the old is new, the ancient is innovative, and the forgotten is remembered. We believe that sacred healing is your birthright. Join us on each episode as we uniquely, authentically, and mystically dive into the bold and vulnerable life of many magical humans. From breath, spirituality, shadow work, and all things in the esoteric realm of healing, we don't leave any stone unturned on this bold journey of growth as we start to explore the remembrance of what it means to be human. So take a deep breath in and a deep breath out, and let's get sacred.
Hello, sacred humans. Welcome to the podcast. Today, I am chatting with somebody who is a mentor to me, somebody who I look up to, and somebody who is always a shining and positive influence on my life, and that comes in the form of Alicia K. Alicia is a master at bringing the dark and shameful places of any of her clients into the light so that they can learn to alchemize their pain into their purpose and fully accept themselves as those divine beings that incarnated into human form. She has spent the last 18 years as a licensed mental health counselor, LMHC, and is a certified EMDR clinician, which stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. That's a mouthful. She also specializes in supporting clients who struggle with childhood wounding and physical and sexual trauma. And she works with people who have relationship issues or addictions and much, much more. And in addition to her work as a psychotherapist, she's a certified life coach from the Institute of Certified Coaches and Certified Somatic Release Breathwork Practitioners. Her foundation is to teach clients how to accept all parts of themselves to achieve balance and equilibrium within their mind and body and spirit so that it manifests in their external world. So as within, so without. In her personal life, Alicia has made it her life's mission to heal herself from her own horrific childhood experiences so that she can show the world what is possible when you choose to align with love over fear and with love over hate. To me, Alicia is the embodiment of resiliency. And today she identifies as a single mother, a business owner, an old soul, a light worker, a flame, and above all else, a divine feminine being who broke free from years of social programming and religious dogma and intergenerational curses and brought herself into being the light being that she is today. So combining all of her professional skills into a practical and spiritual approach is her true passion. And she fully trusts that when a soul is given the right conditions to heal and to dislodge pent-up emotion and pain, they can realign with their higher selves to co-create a life with the universe that is full of love and peace and pure joy. And because she's already helped thousands of people do it, she knows that it works. And Alicia's helped me do just that. She is just such a light being in this orb of joy and energy, and she's a ball of creation, and she lights up every space that she enters, and she is the medicine just by doing that. And so please enjoy this intelligent and playful and joyous and intellectual conversation with my dear, emotionally intelligent friend, Alicia K. I love that we just intuitively closed our eyes and took multiple breaths and just sat here in silence and just knew that that was really what we needed, especially with our personalities, because we both have really big personalities. And that's actually what I love about you. But yeah, everyone, welcome to the Sacred Healing Podcast. Today, I have a very, very special guest. She's near and dear to my heart. She's somebody who's been an inspiration in my life, somebody who I have been able to have really deep conversations with about some of the really hard shit in life. And I've told this person things that I've told almost no one in my life, because she has such a deep understanding of some of the wounds that I've been through. And she's got such a beautiful gift of being able to truly and deeply listen, which is a skill that is really hard to master in our day and age of distraction and being pulled in multiple different directions. And she's somebody that is there with an open ear and an open heart. We've hiked through the mountains together for days at a time and had such deep conversations and got to know each other so well. And I feel like if anything's going on in my life, I can just pick up the phone and call her. So without further ado, my dear friend Alicia is on the podcast today. So welcome, Alicia, to the show.
Thank you, Jessica. That was such a heartwarming intro, and I can say the same about you. You know, there's not many people in my life that I can say was an instant connection, and I truly feel that on a soul level, that our bond was definitely meant to happen and happened exactly at the right time and space, which is always how life works.
Yeah.
And I just value our friendship and our relationship so much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, you're one of those people where not only do we connect over somatic breathwork because we've both gone through somatic breathwork training separately, and then also have done breathwork together and been in containers where we're just like ripping our hearts open and sharing those experiences and integration with each other. But also, you've been somebody who's inspired me from the aspect of the warrior, and it's a really big archetype in my life where it's been something where I've like been able to like truly shine in the power of being like my warrior self. I've been a martial artist for many years. I've been in that space where I can like really truly like feel into my warrior spirit. And then at other times I've been like completely just like pushed down and not able to show that part of myself because of whatever wounding or societal norm I'm trying to confine myself to, or whatever it is in the world that's coming up. So I've had like this up and down relationship with this archetype of being the warrior spirit. And it's something that you really inspired in me to like reignite, because we had the beautiful opportunity of doing a kendo experience together. And we actually didn't fight each other in a kendo match, but you fought. And I just saw this like radiating light coming off of you that was like, oh, hell no, like I'm going to win. And it brought up this like beautiful energy that wasn't a angry energy or negative energy. It was really like a beautiful, sacred, ceremonial energy of the warrior. And it was one of those things where it's like, I absolutely respect the person that I'm like engaging with, but at the same time, like I'm gonna fucking kick your ass. And so it just reignited and sparked something really special in me. So I also wanted to say thank you for just being a beautiful warrior spirit, because I see you whenever I look at you, I'm like, oh, that's Alicia, but I'm like, oh, she's a fucking badass warrior boss biatch. And like, it makes me so happy because I see that in you and like reflected back in myself. So so thank you for being that as well. For me, personally.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. It's such a beautiful mirror. And as you know, through our own wounding, we often don't see ourselves the way that others see us, and so a lot of my work has been learning how to channel that inner masculine in me in a really healthy way without wanting to put up the fight, but being like firm and being more in that energy in a very powerful way, but not like a wounded warrior way. Like, this is me. This is my feminine. This is my essence. And I'm not going to hide that or shame that or judge that the way that I used to when I was younger, before I was not in my healed, awakened state. It was like a process, allowing that part of me to come through in a way where it's not aggression and it's not like anger. It's real, authentic power.
I so resonate with that because I am a fire sign and I've just struggled with it my whole life. Like, how to harness the energy of that fire energy has been something that I've been like really, really like in this back and forth duality with my whole life. And especially through, going from a younger woman to a woman, and going through hormonal changes in life and things that just like bring up all this energy, and how to harness that in a really healthy way rather than what my old self would do, which was like harness it in a way that's unhealthy, and not great with boundaries and all the things that needed to happen. So thank you for just being an inspiration of somebody who's like been able to harness that. And I know it's probably both still a journey for us every day. But yeah, thank you for being an inspiration. And one of the reasons why I wanted to invite you on the show, not only because you're such a good friend, but also because you have such deep experience with not only internal family systems and wounding and really like healing self from a place of talk therapy, but also from a place of like somatically informed and trauma informed therapy. So, I would love for you to tell the listeners kind of what it is that you do. And then we can kind of get into some deep topics because I want to like dive right into the crunchy, like right away. I also want to give everyone like the flat line of like, okay, this is what Alicia does professionally. This is who she is. And then we can kind of dive into some of the really like intense trauma informed work that you do.
Absolutely. Yeah. So baseline, I am a constant learner of self. I started my journey in my 20s when I just knew that I wanted to do something with my life, but wasn't sure what. And that led me down the path of psychology into like mental health counseling. And right away, I was thrown into the fire of working in a rape crisis center fresh out of college. Like I had no idea all the stuff that went on in society. And so it was very much a culture shock for me to see all the bad things that happen to people. And so through that process and figuring out, like, I have such a heart for these people and these women and these men and what they're carrying and what they've went through, and like hearing the stories and all the things that happened. Like I said, it was culture shock, but it also activated all the wounding in me that I didn't have awareness of until I started my profession. And so it really was a journey of healing self, but also wanting to gain all this knowledge to teach people how to heal themselves without the labels of there's something wrong with you, you're mentally ill, you have a disorder, like take this medicine. All those things never resonated with me. I always knew that inside people was their true self that was waiting to be revealed and waiting to come through them. And if I just learned how to hold space in a way and have compassion and teach people how to really heal their deepest, darkest wounds, then that authenticity can come and shine through. And so it's been a process of helping my clients do that through talk therapy and somatic breath work, but also in healing myself along the way. So it was like a very parallel journey to really help me embody who I was with all the things that happened to me in my life. My soul chose an incredibly tumultuous path. And I just knew that I was meant to help others the way that the shining stars in my life pulled me out of my darkness and out of my pain. So I wanted to be that anchor for the people that I work with.
I think it's so fitting that your soul chose a tumultuous path. I mean, we were just talking about the warrior archetype, and I'm like, no, that makes sense. Like, totally makes sense. But yeah, I appreciate all the work that you do with clients, because the theme of this podcast is sacred healing, and what you're talking about is really how you can find healing without the use of a numbing substance, because that can be so prevalent in our society today, where we're labeling and then diagnosing and prescribing. And I think that comes from a really, systemic place and world that we live in, but also people don't know how to get out of that, or don't necessarily know all the methodologies that are available to them that are an alternative to always going down that route, because that route has a place and a time. and like, where would we be without Western medicine? But there are alternatives to that that can really heal on a deep level, a spiritual level, a soul level. And so, what I would love to open up with you first is a deep topic that we could probably go on about for about 4 hours, but we'll try to keep it deep, but also like share the pearls of this theme of core wounding. And so I know that you have done a lot of work on core wounds. We were just talking about kind of how wounds can really shape who we are today, but specifically wounds that happen within their first 5 years of life. Mm-hmm. And so I would love for us to dive into your experience personally and professionally with core wounds and how they shape you and what your take is on that.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, when we choose to come into this earth plane as a soul, we choose to take on a bunch of wounding, because the truth is that not any of our parents are fully equipped to give us exactly what we need to not only individually thrive, but spiritually thrive and feel connected and feel whole. And so when we, are so vulnerable at the stage of birth, so many of us just come in with birth trauma. We're birthed into hospital settings and we're poked and we're prodded and we're all of the things. And I don't shame anybody for that because my son came in that way. And I truly trust that that was the way that his soul chose. However, what we know now is that separation, right? Even just that alone is a trauma that the nervous system and the body holds on to. And so it will come out automatically feeling like it's not safe, right? Feeling like you're not safe in the world. And so that source of safety and comfort usually is the biological mom. But mom is also in a traumatized state. And then if dad isn't around, then dad's in a trauma, so we are born into situations where our parents are not equipped to meet us where we are at, which is the representation of the divine, right? So our parents are supposed to represent the love of the divine through masculine and feminine consciousness. But when we're not getting that, our psyche will automatically start to make up a belief system around what is wrong with us, because it wants to cope and it wants to adapt and it's doing its job to survive in a world where it knows nothing and everything is a blank slate. And so through the things that happen to us in our younger years, the mind will automatically start to make assumptions based on the feelings that's happening in the body. Right. I always use the prime example that our generation of parents were taught to essentially let the baby cry itself to sleep. Right. A baby needs to learn how to self-soothe. If you pick them up every single time that it's crying, they never learn how to self-soothe. Now, what that does is that creates a wound called emotional deprivation. Right. That's one of the core wounds that many of us are holding on to around my emotions are not accepted. They will not be met if I am reaching out emotionally. So then I learn to hide and shame myself when I'm feeling something very, very deep, right? So we learn to build a protector part around us where we either numb or we become afraid of our own emotional experiences because we had parents or caregivers that were not equipped to meet that need, right? And so then it creates the other, so there's 5 core wounds that happen before the age of 7. One of them is emotional deprivation, which I just talked about. Another one is abandonment, right? If you use the crib example, it is, right? When I need someone to be there, they're not going to be there for me. And so I have a core wound of abandonment, of the people that love me are going to leave me. They're not going to be there for me. And so we play that out in our adult lives and through our relationships and often pick people who actually will leave us to reignite that wound so that we can evolve out of that and work through it, which our soul ultimately wants us to do. And so then the other one is mistrust and abuse, right? If I'm crying and my dad spanks me and says, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, what we have is a mistrust and abuse core wound that people that love me are going to hurt me, right? Or love hurts. And so there's something wrong with me because the people that love me are hurting me. And so I then have a protective mechanism that I take into adulthood around relationships aren't safe, people aren't safe, people are going to hurt me, right? The world is dangerous, all the things that we make sense of because of the things that happened in those first years of life. And so it's the three of emotional deprivation, mistrust, abuse, abandonment. And then the other two are more social. And so it is defectiveness, like there's something wrong with me. I'm not like other people. I don't fit in. I don't get along with my family. Kids in the neighborhood don't play with me. There must be something wrong with me at my core. I am defective. And the other one, the last one, usually happens, around 6 or 7. It's called like social isolation or social alienation, where it is, I am not accepted as I am socially. And so when we have these core wounds, we can see how it can play out in adult life as these symptoms that people want to label as like anxiety or addiction, because we have to cope with those deep, deep rooted feelings that are in our bodies from when we're very young, and we don't really understand the dynamics of all that's going on.
Okay, so can you repeat the 5 core wounds again, all in order, so we can kind of break each one of those down?
Yeah. Abandonment, mistrust, abuse, emotional deprivation, defectiveness, and social isolation or alienation.
Whew. Okay, and all that's happening within the first 5 to 7 years of life, everyone. So welcome to Earth. Welcome to Earth, alien.
Welcome to complete separation from the divine and like thrown into the fire of wounding.
Okay. So let's maybe break those down a little bit, kind of piece by piece. And you mentioned kind of the first 3 are kind of a chunk, and then the second 2 come after. Because the first 3, from what you were describing, and maybe they go into different examples as well, but from what you were describing, the first 3 seem to happen like, okay, you're birthed and holy shit, that was an experience. And now there's this like concept of separation from mother and your own being, right? You have the vibrational frequency of autonomy in that at that moment. And all of those 3 seem to come like right from that moment within like crib experience and experience of being a baby. Do those 3 kind of continue on into childhood at times, or are they more the experience of like baby can't talk, can't communicate, doesn't have a way to say what's going on? Are those in that bucket, or do they trickle out into childhood beyond that?
Yeah, it depends on the family dynamic, right? So let's just say you have the birth trauma of being birthed into a regular hospital setting, but mom is super supportive and nurturing and always there and is cuddling you and does like skin to skin and is a stay-at-home mom and can meet all your needs. Like the chances that that core wound will evolve, it helps it not, right? It helps correct it. But if you have an experience which in our society, I personally don't agree with, where mom has to go to work after 3 months and you're left with like a babysitter or someone else that isn't the representation of your safety net or your safe zone after a 3-month period, right? You will develop an abandonment wound, because all of a sudden, like, here's your secure base, and then mom is now gone because she has to be in the workforce, and dad obviously has to be in the workforce, and some of them are not even around. That's automatically going to start to create a feeling of abandonment. Like the one source that I felt the safest with is no longer there.
Hello, sacred humans. Quickly, I want to share with you something I've added into my daily rituals that has me buzzing, and that is Rise Mushroom Coffee. Rise entered my life through my Instagram algorithm that obviously knows what products I like, and I gave it a try, and just wow, it has amazingly delicious flavor. Not only this, they also have a mushroom matcha powder. Phew, mind blown. And they're filled with superfoods and super mushrooms. What I like about Rise is that they use 100% organic ingredients, and their mushroom farms are located in California. If you've always wanted to try mushroom coffee but haven't yet pulled the trigger, this is your moment. And there is zero risk because they have a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you're interested in the deliciousness of Rise mushroom elixirs, head to the show notes and you will find a link for 20% off your first order. Or simply use the discount code Jessica, all caps, at checkout. That's JESSICA, all caps, at checkout. And now, let's get back to our amazing episode of the Sacred Healing Podcast.
Right. Now, not to mention, we often have mothers or fathers, or my situation was my dad didn't want a child, right? So I didn't have like a father or a masculine figure in my life that was there. So eventually I grew up believing that men will always leave me, right? That was my experience throughout all of my relationships when I was younger, because I essentially was holding on to that belief system of not being wanted by my father, which a lot of us really carry. So it can happen in a progressive way, to answer your question, over the course of time in childhood, right? We often see kids who are like dropped off at school, as you know, even in kindergarten, that have a ton of anxiety, like huge separation anxiety. And the way that we deal with that is like, nope, hand her right off to the teacher, and like, nope, mom, you're the problem. Walk away, mom, we'll handle this. Versus like comforting the child, ensuring that they're safe, being there, helping the child integrate, and really doing a better job. So a lot of different things can happen to ignite these wounds throughout the first 5 to 7 years of life.
Okay. So now
That's a
that
lot.
we've all
Sorry.
got all these 5 wounds.
We all have them, by the way. It's just, do you want to acknowledge them or not?
Now that we all have them, what do we do with them? Yeah, so how do you help clients figure out kind of where these wounds are stemming from, and how can we heal some of this to help us kind of move forward? Because when you have all of this pent up stress, anxiety, trauma, whatever you want to call that suppression when we're young, it then develops into whatever it develops into when you're an adult. And that can form in many different ways. From childhood experience could look so different in adult life for every single human being. And part of that is like personality and some people would say astrology, some people wouldn't, but like there's a lot of different aspects that happen in childhood. I don't think any of us will go in our first 5 to 7 years unscathed. I would say like everyone has some sort of trauma, because trauma is in their own perception. And so like everyone's going to get hit within the first 5 to 7 years of life. No question, right? So, and on varying degrees of what that might look like for them. And so we've all got trauma. So now that we have these wounds and these 4, 5 core wounds that everyone really shares, how do we then start to heal that when we're older and we're looking back and we're saying, what happened? How did I get like this? And what is this pattern? Because I'm noticing this pattern. And where did this start? Where did this come from?
Absolutely. It's a great question. And without going into the rabbit hole of the true self, the foundation is always knowing that your true self that is inside of you, that came into this body, is full of joy and peace and love and safe, and like really emanates a lot of power. And so we have to really start to look at what has happened to me to make that part of me hide, to make it not be the part of me that is running my life and leading the show. And the one way that I always encourage people to do that is become super aware of the thoughts that you're having, because the thoughts that you're having are always a blueprint to what is unresolved and unhealed in you. Right. So what's a good example? I could just use something that came up with my son recently. Right. So, I noticed that my house was pretty clean and it was in order in my perception. And we started to do this project, and it was a longhouse project. And all of a sudden my house was a huge mess. And I noticed my body starting to have a contraction. And I noticed myself starting to get hard and irritated and almost like snippy at him. And I was like, what is the thought that I'm having? So the thought that I'm having is like, this place is a huge mess. All right, well, why is that a sensitivity to me? Right? What has happened to me in my life where I am sensitive to this house being a mess right now when he's just being a 10-year-old little boy and he's supposed to be having fun doing a school project, but I'm all in my irritation because I know I'm being triggered, because that triggered feeling or that irritation feeling is not really me. It's a coping mechanism, a symptom of what's unresolved in me. So then I was like, all right, after he went to bed, I was able to really figure out the thought that I was having, the feeling in my body, and why that's there. Right. So because I grew up in a home where I had a mom who was incredibly messy and didn't care about the cleanliness of our home, I always was really embarrassed. I always felt like I didn't want to have my friends over. I always felt like something was wrong with me and that I wasn't like other kids. And so, of course, when my son is making a huge mess around our home, that's going to trigger the unresolved feeling in me of what it was like to be in a home where I felt like I was embarrassed and my mom didn't give a crap about that. Right. So the work is to recognize what is your stuff and what essentially the universe is trying to show you through your relationships, because our relationships are always mirrors for us to work through our own wounding. Is, I journaled about it, I wrote about it, I was on the treadmill and I was like, I'm so angry that this and this and this, and I like let that feeling really move through me because I know better than to keep it in my body. And I always know that as it moves, it creates more space and clarity and freedom to just be present in the moment.
Yeah. And I think because you're so somatically informed, you know that like when you clear the vessel, your mind will become clear in itself. And so it's from a place of like deep intelligence and practice that you've been able to kind of like do this work on yourself, because you're sitting there being like, I'm noticing, I'm feeling, I'm paying attention to, and you're doing this whole like journey into your own being and your own self and clearing that vessel out. And that's why you're so great at doing this with other people, because you do it on yourself and it works. And what a great example too of like the messiness of the house triggering a part of you that's like, this really ticks me off. Why is that? And then having the intuition and the inquisitiveness and the curiosity to try to understand where that came from. That's hard work. That's like that's like level 2.0 of like, or like 5.0, because most people will have a trigger like that and either not know where it's coming from, want to blame, shame, or guilt, and then not do work on it or try to integrate it. And so like that's kind of where we are generally. And I know that, and I won't say that without saying that about myself. Like I've done that before. I've been like, no, I don't need to work on that. That's just how I am. That's just how I show up in the world. Like no big deal. But I know better now because I've done so much work on myself. But like the old me would have been like, nope, that has nothing to do with me. Right. Sure. Whereas like, not being afraid to kind of turn that mirror around and be like, damn it.
Well, and I think it's about radical responsibility and accountability. And it's you know, it's always something coming up in us,
Mhm.
always.
Mhm.
And I think what I find parents doing differently in this generation versus other generations was I was able to talk to my son about it, right? Because if we don't have that talk, like many of our parents didn't tell us why they did what they did or why they felt what they felt or why they said what they said, so we were left to take it personal, right? Of like, my mom doesn't love me, or my mom doesn't care about me because she didn't come in and say why she was doing what she was doing. And so I said to my son, I said, I have to be honest, I'm really sorry about how irritated I was when we were doing your longhouse project. What I realized was that when I was young, I used to have a really messy house, and grandma didn't care if our house was a mess. And I really was embarrassed about that. And so I'm telling you to know that this really had nothing to do with you. This was really my own stuff that I was working through. And he was like, okay, mom, like that's it, right? It's not about like acquiescing to your kid. It's about, you don't want that child to hold that feeling that you put in them because you're not being radically responsible with your own crap that you're projecting on to your loved ones.
I absolutely love the way that you put that. I mean, first of all, radical responsibility, but second of all, like, amen to that type of parenting where you can take radical responsibility for things that are yours to hold. And you and I have gone really deep on this topic, and I haven't talked about this topic at all on the podcast. I will when it's time, but you know that I've gone through a really, really hard parental alienation situation
Mhm.
that is like absolutely devastating for the child.
Yeah.
And it is one of those things where it's like you can do all the work in the world and take that radical responsibility, but you're not the only one in the picture, right?
Right.
And so that's where parenting is so hard, because you can do your stuff, but there's always, either one or multiple other parents involved. And so parenting is like, we could probably talk about that for like a whole episode, but not
Absolutely.
not going too far down that rabbit hole. I think it's just amazing that you've been able to not only do the work on yourself, but also start to understand in relation where you are to your son to say, hey, I'm going to take radical responsibility for my shit so that I don't epigenetically pass that on through your soul into my grandchildren, into my
Mm-hmm.
grandchildren's grandchildren. And I'm going to stop it right here and really
Yeah.
just heal it. And so I think that that's absolutely just like a stunning part of your personality, is that you always look at your shit and you're like,
Yeah.
fuck, this is mine. This is
Yeah.
mine. I'm gonna take it. Thanks so much. Um, so when we look at our core wounds, and you just like gave a really good example of how they can show up in kind of adult life. Um, what if we're not that intuitive about it? What if we're in a situation where we're like, holy shit, we're not ready to see that? How
Mhm.
can these show up in our life and create chaos and like
Mhm.
disorder, essentially?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I feel, unfortunately, that a lot of people are there. And because the soul is always wanting you to evolve and always wanting expansion, it will essentially arrange things to be really, really difficult until you're ready to look at it. Maybe there is a trauma or an illness or an accident, or like something will radically shift you out of your way of being in order to help you wake up and either take responsibility, either heal, learn how to set boundaries and not sacrifice yourself. Something will happen to shift a person um, into awareness or into awakening, to take a look at what's going on, because we all have a purpose of why we're here and what we came here to do and what we came here to heal and resolve. And eventually, if we keep, because free will is a thing, we're allowed to not look at ourselves, we're allowed to not believe that this has anything to do with us, but eventually something, it's like sandpaper that will keep like rubbing you and rubbing you and rubbing you until you are forced to do that. And usually it's something that is, unfortunately really unpleasant. And so I teach people to recognize your patterns, recognize what's coming up in you, understand what your wounding is, and really commit to doing that deeper work. Or, essentially the universe is going to arrange something for you to force that. They call it like an ego death or like a dark night of the soul, because that's really what it feels like when everything around you starts to shift and change in a radical way.
So if you don't look at it, it will come to you anyway.
That's right.
um and kind of like on that same thread, um we kind of lightly touched on repeating wounds. What are some of the like repetition patterns that you've either seen in your practice or in your self work, with folks with those 5 core wounds? How do those connect to the repetition of patterns later in life?
Yeah, usually it happens in our relationships, either friendships or intimate relationships with partners, where we will attract unconsciously what's not resolved in us, right? So if you have a core wound of, something's wrong with me or I'm not enough, you are energetically going to align and attract a partner that's going to make you feel that way. So because it's not your true self and your psyche doesn't want you to hold on to that anymore, it will bring circumstances and people in your life to show you where you're not free. And this pattern is revealing itself. And so we repeat what we don't resolve until we actually learn the lesson and resolve it. Maybe it is we need to set better boundaries. Maybe we need to start sacrificing ourselves. Maybe we need to say no, right? Whatever it is, we have to value ourselves more because we grew up with the wound that we weren't valued or we weren't important or we weren't enough, or whatever it is that we feel internally will always represent itself in the external world. So it really is meant to, help you evolve. But what happens in our culture, because people aren't talking about this and they're not teaching it in schools and they're certainly not talking about it in, friendships and relationships, is we then think that something is wrong with us because we keep repeating these same patterns and we keep attracting these same people. And so it must be us. It's like a little bit, yeah, but it's because you're not really being curious about what the work is or what the lesson is so that you can evolve out of that pattern.
It's like pulling the same card over and over and over and over, and you're like, fuck. Getting this
Yeah. I
hard.
can't tell you how many men that I dated that were like my father in different ways until I really healed the core wound of my father. Like it was like, oh, you mean that I'm attracting these people who treat me like crap because I didn't deal with my father crap? Oh, well, then I'll just do that. That seems way easier than keeping the cycle going, right?
Like, where's the next one? Are you guys in line outside the door?
I was like, oh, this one has this aspect, this one has this. And I started just to wake up to what my part was in that, right? This is happening to me because I'm allowing it to happen to me.
Happening for you because you're allowing it to happen to you.
Exactly. That's right. That's right.
And that comes back to the radical responsibility for, okay, what's my part in this? And this is repeating. So what do I need to look at here? So having that like inquisition to say, what is this? What is this piece that I need to kind of peel open? You do a lot of parts work. What does it look like when you're doing work to try to get to that layer of like peeling back the layers of the onion to get to the part of the person that you need to have a conversation with, one-to-one, to say, man, I need to look at this thing about my life. And I think 2-part question. So like, how does that evolve? And then also like, maybe we can explain for the listeners, like what parts work is, because I know you're a big fan of internal family systems and that type of, therapeutic healing. So I'd love to maybe explain what that is and then how you kind of dive into those different layers. Today, I want to share with you all the delicious cacao with a K, drinking chocolate. Cacao is one of my favorite brands of ceremonial grade cacao and is a delicious addition to my morning routine. Cacao is jam-packed with delicious nutrients that work with my body to stay energized, connected, and focused. What I also love about cacao is that they are a nonprofit on a mission to protect the native heirloom strands of cacao in both Peru and Guatemala by giving back to the farmers and communities that make it available to us. If you are interested in cacao with a K, go to the show notes and you will find a link for 10% off your first order, or simply by using the discount code Jessica, all caps at checkout. That's JESSICA, all capital letters at checkout.
Absolutely. So I said earlier that our core self is, or our true self is the self that comes, it's basically the self that takes your first breath or that chooses to come into the earth plane. And our whole life, we are really working to reconnect to our true self and to our essence, to our authenticity, right? Our unique core soul blueprint that we all have. And in order to protect that self, parts of our personality start to form to survive. And that usually happens really early in life, like I said, before age 7, where we will have parts of us that will try to fit in and conform because we don't want to be rejected, right? Super adaptable, super intelligent for our psyche and our brain to do that. But what happens is that when that part starts to take over in adult life, it can look like a perfectionist or a people pleaser, or someone who's playing a part to fit in or to protect themselves or to appear normal to society. So I always look at the ways in which you're trying to appear normal and fit in to cultural acceptable norms that isn't the true self. And then I also look at the other side of how are you coping with your intense emotion or your stress or what's going on with life. So we have protector parts that we allow other people to see because we don't want anybody to see our wounds and we want people to think we have it all together. And then on the flip side of that, we have other things that we do that maybe are not very healthy. So a part of me, like I have a really rageful teenager, like she is definitely in there and she ran rampant for a really long time.
Same. She's in there.
Yeah, and she
Comes
is, but
out.
she is great when we like learn how to the second part is learning how to integrate that part of you. But when they're separate or we try to get rid of them or we don't like them or we don't want anybody to know about them, it actually makes that part stronger. So it can look like, drinking drinking wine as a famous one all women do. It's like, oh, big deal. I'm making dinner. I'm just going to have wine and I'm going to have more wine or whatever that is. So it's these things that we do to escape our emotional experiences that I call parts or internal family systems call our firefighters. They put out the flame or the feeling that we don't want to feel. So I'm always looking at the ways that you're protecting yourself and what you're doing to cope that isn't as healthy because these two, they feed off of each other and they protect the inner child that holds on to all of the woundings and the feelings of defectiveness, helplessness, powerlessness, insecurity, not enoughness, right? So these parts are trying to hide that inner child wounding. And so through working with these parts of self, we can really get down deep into why they formed, why they're there, what their purpose is. How can we help them evolve in a way where they're not sabotaging your life or they're not making you feel like you're not normal, so that you can feel more really integrated and whole, right? Because the whole you is the sum of all of your parts, and learning how to love and accept each one of them for the role they play and transform and transmute them into something that works better as an adult that you want to be, which is usually like loving, kind, compassionate, boundaried, firm, creative, passionate, playful, fun, right? When you're integrated, that's your natural essence. That just comes through you because you're not trying to constantly play a role or over evaluate or hide. If that makes
Okay.
sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think, some of those protector parts come out when we are trying to conform or be in community or tribe or part of something bigger than us, because we don't want to feel excluded or kicked out of the group, or I'm not good enough to be with these people or whatever. And so we'll put on a series of masks, mask after mask after mask after mask, to say, oh, you guys are all oranges. Well, I'm going to be an orange too, even though truly at my core, I'm a pineapple. And like the part of me that can really connect to my pineappleness is the part that is like my unique, authentic, and my dharmic gift to the planet and to the cosmos and to the world. And so if I'm going to keep pretending to be an orange when I'm really a fucking pineapple, that's a problem for connecting to soul and
That's
connecting
right.
to spirit, because you're trying to be something that you're uniquely not, and your uniqueness is your gift. Like
That's right.
that is your genius zone. And so I just use that random fruit analogy, but like it's something I've been thinking about a lot, where it's like, don't you want to be that like juicy, sweet, like ripe yellow pineapple? Like, don't you want to be that? Why is this other thing coming in? Well, that's a protector. That's a protector so that you will be able to not be excommunicated from community, tribe, family, friendships, whatever it is, partnership, even. So
Yeah, and that's a prime example of how the core wounding takes over. Because if I come out of the womb and I'm a pineapple and I'm a super curious, playful little 2-year-old, and I have all this fire and spite and curiosity and fun, and I'm getting shamed or I'm getting punished or I'm getting beat or I'm getting like ignored, I'm going to hide my pineapple from the world because it's not safe to be that.
yeah,
Right. So
yeah.
that's how these parts form.
Mhm.
And it's really just a journey back to finding your inner juicy, wild, free, fruitful pineapple. And like, how do I
Yes.
bring that out?
So when you're doing parts work, so what you've explained, and I'll just reiterate it, so hopefully it makes sense in both my brain and the brains of the listeners, is, what I'm hearing you say is we have parts of us that come alive to protect us. And the more traumas or suppressions that we have throughout our lives, the more of these protector parts will start to show up in different forms and in different ways. But what they're really doing is protecting the inner child that also has core wounds. um, and they're just there to protect so that you're not excommunicated from society, essentially.
Yeah.
How do you work with clients to unwrap some of this tightly woven shit? Because some
Mhm.
people's parts, I speak from personal experience, are fucking powerful. Like
Oh,
those
yeah.
parts don't want to get out of the way. And so how do
Mm-mm.
you work with clients to be able to have some of these massive breakthroughs in a safe way where they can really
Absolutely.
start to connect to the inner child a little bit more?
Yeah, I love this question. And it really just depends on the degree of trauma and how much is there. I work extensively with complex trauma and worked diligently to heal my own. And so I personally can relate to all people's parts. I kind of resonate or know them well because of the alchemy that's happened within my own system. And so one, we have to understand that it is you created it and it is you, right? A lot of people will say, like we'll just use addiction for example, right? Like so if someone has like a drinking problem or a pornography problem or whatever, we shame that, right? We think we want that part to go away. And we're like, no, like if that part was if I didn't have that part in my life, I'd be okay. It's like, no, you created that part at a time in your life when you needed that part. So let's understand the purpose of why it's there, because parts don't play their roles if it doesn't feel strong about why they're doing what they're doing. So we help each person get to know, let's just say, all right, we'll just use a random, what do you want to call the addicted part of you? I don't know, Sally Sloppy, I guess, something like that. All right,
Sally
well, what is she?
Oh my gosh. Okay, Sally Sloppy. Yes,
Right?
I
She's
love
the one
her.
that drinks too much and is the life of the
Oh,
party that like takes it too far all the time and that I shame, that I hate. If that wasn't there, I'd be fine, right? So we start to look at the language that people use to describe themselves and how they talk about themselves. And I'm like, that's a part, right? That it's playing a role. So let's, you know, is it okay to get to know that part of you? I always use the language as it's a part of you. It's not all of you. It's just a piece of you, right? Because when you think that like I am just that, then your inner shamer comes on, your inner critic, and it's constantly criticizing you about this part of you. And so you feel a separation inside instead of like a unity inside of how to work together, right? So what does it look like? How old does it feel? Let's give it a name. Where do you feel it in your body? And then I use the language. Is it okay to get to know this part? And crazy things happen when you psychologically ask certain questions where the brain knows how to answer it. Oh, well, where is she? Oh, she's 9 and she is um, locking herself in her closet because her parents are partying. And then one of the adults came and invited me to have a drink. And then I felt really connected because I was part of the party, right? So we always try to figure out how this part was created and where it originated from, because it's always playing a role and a purpose. Does that make sense?
yeah, it does. And I think it's one thing to kind of introspect and look at, okay, well, maybe I created this. Maybe I need to take radical responsibility. It's another thing to go into all these different parts and start to actually get to know them and name them and start to have relation with them. And just and we can even use this as an example if it resonates with you, but like recently I've been working on my Kali part of myself. And Kali is like a very intense warrior spirit who basically like holds up the heads of men and stamps on Shiva and is just like this really big energy that is fierce and fiery and just fucking fed up for lack of better words. And so I've been really trying to integrate that part of myself that gets so intensely like fiery about specific things in life that come at me. And I've almost like been playing around with that character to say like, oh, okay, like let's play pickleball here. Let's play a game with this part because then I get to be in relation with that part of myself. And one of the other things I've been playing around with too is just like characters, like just getting super fucking silly, because it's one thing, that I did when I was younger, when I used to do theater, was like, oh, let me like embody what this is. And like one of these like characters that I embody is like, well, there's a few of them. One of them is a chin neck, which is like literally my chin upside down with a face drawn on it. And it is a like old, like Southern lady who just like sings songs. But like when I start to connect to different parts that are also characters, it helps me integrate what they're saying and doing in a way that is like so different than what I've ever experienced before. And so parts work is like so deep and so cool because you start to get to know yourself more on such a deep level. And so I've started to see some of those repeat in life and start to come up again. And I'm like, oh, hey, old friend, what's going on there? Very familiar with this. Let's play a game. Let's figure, like, let's laugh. Let's make this a way that it's not angry or sad or full of grief or this type of trauma. Let's flip it so that it's funny. And I get to like do something different with it. So I've been trying to like play around with some of the parts work too, so that it's not
Absolutely.
so sad.
Mhm.
Like how can I turn it to laughter? Right.
Yeah, because our feel good parts are actually in our shadow, right? Because we're trained to believe that in order to get where we want to get to in life, we have to suffer, right? We have to work really hard. It's like, yeah, but that playful part of our personality that like jokes and is like, flips the face upside down is something that we have abandoned and got rid of because it wasn't accepted, right? So you bringing that in is the work. It's like, I freaking love my inner rebel. She is a badass. But when she is not in check, she destroys things.
Oh, she go off. Don't knock everything off the
Right.
table.
She
She doesn't
will
care.
literally burn everything down and not give a crap about anybody if she is not integrated, right?
Oh my God.
Um,
Totally. Totally.
so I think that's the benefit. Like you said, it's like if you don't, like, you have to get to know yourself so that other people get to know you.
Yeah.
I think we and what we like and what we enjoy and what we desire and like what makes us feel alive. um these parts don't want any of that because that was conditioned out of us, and so the
Mm.
fact that you're able to reattach to that and you're able to be curious about that means that a lot of your system has been cleared and these parts are starting to integrate and essentially trust you more or trust life more,
Mm.
which is a very good sign.
Oh, thank you, Alicia. I'm cured. No,
No, there's always work. I hate to tell you,
there's
there's
more.
never a destination. It's always a journey.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate that and also appreciate your perspective on parts because it's such a different experience for every single person that's going through parts work to be able to dive into it. And it also unpacks layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. And there's always another layer. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, there's always another door. Damn it. Like you're never going to get to the bottom of the barrel because it's an endless barrel. It's infinite. It is the universe. It is the cosmos. And so there's always more to be done and to unpack and to understand about yourself and how you interact with the world. One of the things, though, that I want to dive into is how, you know, you really connect to that inner child, how you get past all those protector parts to connect to the inner child. And so I'm curious how you do that in your practice with clients, because getting back to like the essence of, call it 5-year-old self, 7-year-old self, whoever you like really genuinely connect with in your own being from, little girl, little boy, who you connect with when you were, boy spirit, girl spirit.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only person you need to impress. The only person you need to impress is that person. And I have a picture of my 5-year-old self on my altar. She here, she be
Oh yeah.
chilling. Me and my
I love
sister.
it.
I know my sister gets her own appearance here too.
So good.
But it's like, who do I need to press? I need to press that girl right there. She's
Yeah.
looking at me and she's like, oh hell yeah, let's go. Let's fucking
Mhm.
go. And so how do you get clients to unpack these protector parts in order
Mhm.
to make these deeper connections with 5-year-old self, inner child, whatever word you have for that part?
Yeah, I think it starts with getting the protector parts on board. And it is really developing a relationship. Not only having the client develop a relationship with this part, but also me as a practitioner. You know, can this part step aside so that we can talk to the 5-year-old that felt abandoned, abused, or betrayed? And then if it's a no, then we still work with the part that has the resistance. All right, well, what is this part afraid of? What is this part afraid will happen if we connect to 5-year-old? Let's talk about that. Right. So we just keep working and working until eventually, right? It's almost as if the soul is always wanting you to evolve, always, right? It's like a plant growing toward the sun. It's always going to want to remove those blocks and those barriers. But it's first helping a person understand that the reason that you're having the distress that you're having in your life is because these things are not integrated within you, right? There's a part of you that's afraid to feel that what the 5-year-old had to feel. right? You spent your whole life not feeling that. Why would you want to go back there to feel it? So it's in helping them understand that as they start to do the layers of feeling through what they went through, that they actually have a shift that happens in their life. Oh, I feel more clear. I felt more patient. I actually slept better. I didn't want to drink wine tonight. Like they start to see how the work that they're doing with me actually is having a positive impact outside of our container. um and so it's learning how to free and unburden that child inside, right? Allowing yourself to be vulnerable is your soul's greatest gift. So many of us have been detached from our feminine side, right? Now, we all have masculine and feminine energies in us. It doesn't matter how you identify gender wise, but the feminine is emotional, right? We have feelings that want to come through. And because we haven't been felt safe enough to feel them, we exile it and pretend it's not there, right? So helping people really reattach to, that little child inside of you that wants to love and play and be curious and use their imagination. That is what we are trying to help you reattach to so that you can feel alive and free in your adult life. So, what does that child look like? Where is he or she sitting? What's the look on their face? Can you just get to know it? Ask it questions, him or her questions. Eventually it's working up to, does that child want to stay in that home with those parents, or does it want to come home with you, where we can create either a spot in your heart for him to live, or in your own home where you create like an altar like you're doing? How do we integrate this part in you so it doesn't feel so separate, abandoned, or rejected? You become the parent that you needed and didn't get.
For those of you who don't already know, my husband and I own a coffee company called Gay Head Coffee. And of course, we drink our own coffee every day, and it's some of the most flavorful and inviting coffee, especially with the nostalgia of coming from a can rather than paper or plastic packaging. But I'm biased, so check it out for yourself. If you're interested, head over to the show notes where you will find a link to order your coffee today from gayheadcoffee.com. That's GAYHEADCOFFEE.com. Thank you all for your support. It means the world to us as a small business. And one of the things I want to highlight that you touched upon is that if we don't do this work, if we just kind of ignore and continue to go about life the way that we've been going about life, it will show up somatically in the form of, you mentioned not being able to sleep. So insomnia is one of the biggest things that plagues us. Sleep, it, is one of the hugest things that we're dealing with in a mental health space right now in the world. And I know that firsthand from all the work that I've done, working at a specific company that does work with sleep studies and mental health and how that impacts it. So insomnia is a huge one, but also dis-ease in your body, which equals disease. And
That's
so
right.
all of this can show up somatically because you're not doing the work on things that happened when you were between 0 to 5, 7 years old. And it's showing up now in the form of different diseases.
Absolutely.
And so if folks are listening to this and they're like, oh, well, why would I even go down that rabbit hole? It's like, well, you're healing your body.
That's
not
right.
only your mental body, but you're healing your physical body and internally. And so I just wanted to highlight that because I think it's one of the things that's so core to this work and important about this work is that you're not only healing mentally, you're healing physically.
That's
and
right.
That can be a huge shift for people that are suffering with even things like insomnia, or that they don't think, they're like, oh, I can't sleep, it's no big deal. No, you can't sleep. That is like the life force energy that you need to wake up and be a human at every cell of your being that following day. If you want to have a full fucking day and you're not sleeping, damn, that sucks. And I know all new mothers out there are listening and they're like, yeah, I can attest, right? I do
Oh
declare.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
You cannot think
it's
clear.
huge.
Lack of sleep will kill you faster than cancer. Like it's very damaging.
Yeah.
And I would go as far as to say, like, what people actually come to me with mostly is they think they have an anxiety problem. And they're like, I want to heal my anxiety. I'm like, no, 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 you don't have an anxiety problem. You have an unhealed trauma problem. And it's presenting as anxiety because it's the accumulation of stress and emotion and undigested things that accumulate in your nervous system and in your body. And so it's presenting as anxiety. But really, what's going on is you feel scared, you feel angry, you feel sad, you feel like all the feelings that we have denied ourselves to feel. And the conglomeration of all of that energy presents itself as fear. The heart starts to beat really fast. You start to panic. You start to have all this like automatic responses when anything happens that's stressful, because your nervous system is no longer pliable to be able to tolerate any more stress. It's the accumulation of what isn't discharged that feels like very scary.
Mm. And kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum, from like healing to being careful with this type of work, have you ever worked with folks that have recalled things from childhood that then later they were like, oh, well, that's not true. It was just like a made up trauma or abuse. Has that happened? Because I also think when we do this type of work, we have to be so careful. Has that happened before in your practice, or have you dealt with people who have like recalled things that actually aren't true?
No, because what they believe is true is what's relative to them and causing it. Like they may go back and say, like, I guess, a prime example of this would be my first meeting of my biological dad was at age of 4. And what I remember was basically him showing me a deer and telling me that he killed Rudolph. Pretty traumatic for like a 4-year-old little girl, right?
Oh my
And I
God.
also
No,
remember.
Alicia, that's a crazy memory.
No.
Y'all.
Right, but that's like my first meeting. And then I remember there being like a huge party and like my dad doing all these drugs. And so when I talked about it with my mom later, she was like, my story was she just dropped me off and she wasn't there with me. And so she didn't protect me, was my story that so after I ruled it out with her, she was like, I was there with you. No one was doing drugs. The deer thing did happen. But what that didn't do was change the emotional frequency of how painful that was for me. It didn't matter what was true and what wasn't true. What mattered was what my body was holding on to as truth. So I still processed it. And whatever is going on with my clients, I'm also certified in a very specific treatment called EMDR, which is an eye movement therapy that heals and clears out traumatic memory. And so we would still treat it as if the memory was real, because that's what the body and the soul is holding on to as real.
That
Right? It
makes sense.
doesn't
Thank you
change,
for, yeah.
it doesn't change the emotions that are stored in the body just because you
Mhm.
find out it didn't happen.
Got it. Yeah, because that's the one that does make sense. And that's the one thing that I read about IFS that was like a controversy, if you will, or lack of better words. Like the one thing that I read was like, oh, IFS therapy might bring up parts of you that aren't actually true and create trauma or like supposed trauma that didn't actually happen. But you're right. If that is the core wound that you're feeling, you're healing that feeling. You're not healing the actual truth of what happened or didn't happen. And what I believe is that none of our parts are neither good nor bad. They're all able to be alchemized into who you are as self, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah. And when you go through things that are undigested or unresolved, what happens is you really only hold on to the pain. So, including myself, a lot of my clients will say, I don't remember anything positive. And so, as you start to heal the wound, then interestingly enough, the brain will start to bring in new information around, oh, I actually remember my mom did play with me a lot. I just forgot about that because I was holding on to this. Or, oh, I remembered that time that my dad actually did come to this game and he was cheering me on and he really was there. And so maybe he did care about me and he didn't always want to hurt me, right? It kind of like expands the system out to bring in other information that the trauma or the wounding was blocking you from having. So it actually brings in more truth and things that you're not recalling, has been my experience.
And so this other work that you are trained in, this EMDR work, what does that stand for? And what is that? Like, how do you integrate that into doing work with somatic parts work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really has been. It was the one modality that helped me heal the most. I was trained in that, and I went through that before I was trained in other things. And I love it because it is very holistic and it works with the brain and how the brain stores memory. So, as you know, when you go to sleep at night, we go into REM sleep or rapid eye movement sleep. And so, this type of modality is called eye movement desensitization reprocessing. So, it uses eye movements and replicates what the brain does during REM sleep to store and process information. So, in doing it when you're awake, and there are certain things that I will say to cue a client to access the memory, we will use eye movements to help that memory process and regurgitate and bring up. So, it's essentially a way to relive what happened in the present moment and let your brain automatically go to the places that it needs to go to help you resolve the trauma. Because we all have an internal adaptive information processing system where our brain knows how to process what happened to us, but trauma gets stuck. And so this modality actually helps it get unstuck so that you can heal it and then other information becomes available to you that you didn't have before you process the trauma.
And so is that connected to like when you go into a delta state, kind of like in between, kind of like almost asleep, almost like a dream state, but not deep sleep?
Mhm.
Is that
You
where
don't
you're
have to be. Um, Essentially, that's where REM sleep happens. Is yes, REM sleep happens in between that delta theta state, where you're actually like filing in all the things that you did that day, and you're storing it into memory banks, and your brain is really, really active when you're asleep. But this process you're in beta. It would be like you and me talking right now, and I would ask some cueing questions of like, what's the most disturbing part of the memory? What have you made it mean about yourself? Where are you feeling that in your body? How intense does it feel? And then we just, we let the brain do its thing and we work through it by having you follow my fingers with your eyes. And we just activate that natural processing system in the mind to help it regurgitate and digest in a way where it's no longer traumatic memory.
Hmm. Okay, thank you for indulging me in science for a hot minute.
You got it.
I'm genuinely curious. And
Yeah.
I know that you also do a lot of work around learning to use your triggers that come up in ways that can be more teachers. And we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but when folks that haven't done IFS work on a deep level and aren't necessarily like truly connected to these triggers, like what would be the first thing that you would say on how to learn to use triggers that come up in life to then create those into master teachers?
Yeah. Once the emotion settles, one, it's impossible to do deeper work when you're in a super high emotional state, right? We can't create in a survival state, is what I tell people. So you have to wait until you're actually in a place where you're feeling more calm. And then once that settles, like once the trigger passes, or once you're more in a neutral state, I always encourage people to be curious. Um, One of the things that I find is a disservice to the brain and how the brain works is people want to ask why. Why did I act that way? Why did that upset me? And why is it makes sense to ask that, sure, from a human level, but the brain doesn't have It's not specific enough for the brain to answer the question. So I always say, don't ever ask yourself why. Ask yourself what questions. What was going on? What was I thinking? Um, at what point did I feel I started to go into alignment? What was the primary emotion that I was having? Um, what does this remind me of? Where in my life have I felt this before? So you can get curious about what was really going on with you instead of thinking that it was just some random thing that happened by chance and it doesn't matter. It always matters. Your soul's always trying to communicate to you so that you can evolve.
Yeah, I feel that. I feel the soul talking to me all the time. Like, shh, quiet down. We're trying to do a podcast here.
Yeah. Always. It's always in the background.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I guess from recognizing the triggers that we might have from a place of grace and from a place of deeper curiosity and wanting to understand, even though if there's not full understanding yet as to why those triggers are there, how would you walk somebody through a trigger? Like if we could use an example of a trigger, and then maybe like how you would walk somebody down a path to getting through that, and what those what questions would be to kind of get through that. And I don't know if we have like a good example of like a trigger of some sort.
Yeah. So I always use, it's called chain analysis or putting the memory underneath a microscope, right? If we had to really look closely at what was going on when you said something you didn't want to say, or you acted in a way that you weren't proud of, or something, like we have an inner moral compass that's always guiding us. And if something doesn't feel right, it's generally not right. And so it's like, let's put it under a microscope. Where were you? What was going on? What was said? Like, get a clear picture. And then it's, what was the thought that I was having? What was the emotion? And then how did I behave? Because it's always a backwards process. Because people aren't always in tune with what's going on in the body, they're always thinking of something, right? But the mind is always reacting to the sensation in the body, always. So then it's like, this was the thought that I was thinking. This was the feeling that I was having. And this is the automatic reaction that I had, right? Okay, well, let's float back. Let your mind and body float back to the very first time in your life where you felt like you weren't enough and you had feelings of despair in your body. So we kind of like float it back to see what the original root injury or root cause was that's coming up to the surface in present day. And most times people can answer that if they take the time to actually reflect on it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really helped me in terms of reflection is journaling, just like writing down what is going on and almost answering these questions on paper, then to reflect back to it and to really integrate it. And one of the things that I've noticed is that the more I've done somatic breath work and the more I've like used that methodology to like really clear, I've had less and less that I've had to deal with from a trigger perspective.
Absolutely.
I don't know, you're nodding, so I'm assuming you feel the same way. It's just such powerful work. And I know it's why you and I both are practitioners in the space, because it is so powerful for clearing. Would you be willing to share an experience that you've had personally with somatic breathwork that's like helped you clear something out? And
yeah. I mean, I have done talk therapy. I mean, I've been a therapist for almost 20 years now. Also life coach, and like my typical self, I'm always seeking ways to help people heal. One, to do my own inner work, but also to really be able to help people know that what's happening to them is not their fault. And so I came across somatic breath work from a friend who said, if you work with trauma, you need to go get trained in this. And I was like, okay, I didn't really want one more thing, but I've been hearing a lot about breath work and all those types of things. And I obviously work with trauma. So it made sense for me to say, okay. And what happened during that training was something that I will never forget. Um, I went with the intention to get rid of the part of me that's always trembling, that doesn't feel safe speaking in public or using my voice or setting boundaries or, like whenever it came to having eyes on me or I was uncomfortable, like I literally would feel like my heart racing and I would start to tremble inside. So I said, all right, well, I'm going to try to use breath work to clear that out. And it was the very first day. I knew nothing about breath work or what I was going to be trained to do, but the practitioner had put us through the session before telling us anything about the protocol. So I, like I do with everything in life, decided to dive in head first and went
You don't
hardcore.
say. You don't say, Alicia. Yeah.
And I'm breathing and breathing and breathing, and I'm hearing all these people screaming, and I was like, oh, I don't know, like, and I had what was called an immobility response or a freeze response where I was frozen. And I remembered being a little girl frozen against the wall and hearing my mom get beat and her screaming. And I was 2 years old. I remembered the room. I remembered the sound. I remembered my body. I remembered peeing my pants because I was so scared. And I realized that that's where that trembling ignited and came into my body, was that young. And I worked through that with the breath, where I allowed myself to scream and cry and pound the floor and yell. And I just let all of that repressed emotion and fear move through my body. And what happened was remarkable. I mean, through all the work I've ever done with the mind, I've never had anything work with the body in the way that breath work does, where I was able to go home and I was so patient and so present with my son and with work. I felt like I was walking on a cloud because I felt so clear and felt so good. And I just knew that there was something to this work that I had to offer it if I'm going to work with trauma. It really cleared out that blockage in my nervous system from where I always felt scared.
Ooh, thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Wow. Every time I ask somebody about experiences with somatic breath work or somatic work in general, every single time it's a completely different answer.
Mhm.
And every single time I do breath work, it's a completely different experience. And so
Absolutely.
there's times in breath work where I have these like really big aha clearing moments like your experience. And then there's other times where I'm like, man, maybe that didn't really do anything, but I know that it did because
Mhm.
most of the time we're releasing things that we don't even know we're releasing. We're releasing things that live in the body that just don't need to be there anymore. And it's okay if we don't understand what those are.
That's
But to
right.
have that clear of a connection and vision to that experience is like that is so special to have that because
Yeah.
you get to carry that now in a way that's different than you were carrying it before. Because
Mhm.
it's with parts work, it's not to say, oh, we're just going to clear it out and then it's not part of us anymore. It's like, no, that happened in your life. That's how you felt about it. But now you get to hold it in a different way. Get to hold it as a part of yourself that's more empowering than it is prohibiting, which I think is really cool about breath work because yes, we talk about clearing, 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 but we still hold those parts of ourselves. They just look different on the other
That's right.
side. Yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, I've had sessions where I haven't had that huge cathartic reaction, where it was more just somatic, where I feel the tingling and I feel the twitching and I'm kind of activating my nervous system. And it's not as, profound. It's actually more restorative. But I know when I need it now. Like I have a very visceral feeling in my body when I don't feel clear. And it usually is irritability, stress. I go back into my old coping mechanisms or methods. And I'm like, okay, I need to put myself through a session or join a session. And it's a practice now because we accumulate stress every single day of our lives just by being human.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh. Um, well, thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate it. I would love to kind of shout out where people can find you. Where can people find your services for coaching, for parts work, for somatic work? Where are you located? Do you have a website? Social media, all the things.
Of course.
Would love
Super
to
simple.
send you
Everything is Alicia K coaching.
Ooh, okay. Love super
Yeah,
simple. So Alicia K coaching, and it's ALICIA
correct.
KAY coaching.
Yes. So I'm on Instagram, Facebook. My website is aliciakcoaching.com. I have, you can sign up for breathwork sessions there individually. If anybody is interested in doing some really deep, profound work, I have created a signature program where I combine all of my tools as a therapist and as a breathwork practitioner in a very intimate 6-month coaching container called Breakthrough to Bliss. So it really is doing the deeper work, doing the somatic work, and helping you re-identify with that true part of yourself that wants to come through now that all that old stagnant energy is discharged and you're feeling more light and connected with yourself and with life. So it really is like a 3-phase process: clearing out the old, working with the present, manifesting and calling in what your purpose is, what you want, what's divine and what's alive inside of you. So I love putting people through that program. It's very intimate, it's very personal, and it's very effective. But also, if people do not want to do that full, deep, intense work, then they also can hire me as just a coach. So it's all listed on my website, and anybody's welcome to message me on Instagram. And I do offer a free 60-minute consultation for anybody that wants to meet with me, to see if it is a good fit and what I can help with, obviously at no charge. And they can always stay connected as well by signing up for my monthly newsletter, and just staying in sync with what I have going on.
I will link all these links in the show notes so that you guys don't feel like you need to go searching for this. It will all be linked to the episode. And I cannot say enough about how much you have inspired and touched my life. And so I definitely encourage anyone who's interested in doing the deep work, the parts work, to go through the Breakthrough to Bliss program, because it really is something that I just don't know if I could have integrated all of the different parts of my life without getting pieces of IFS in my life and without getting pieces of Alicia in my life. So you're going to want to click that link. Yeah, I just, before we close everything out, I didn't know if there was anything else that you wanted to touch on before we jump, that's feeling really alive for you right now in this moment, because I've been firing questions, and wanted to see if you had anything else that's on your heart before we hop off.
No, I feel complete. Really just blessed and grounded. As always, I had no idea where we were going to go, but I think that we've went to places that people can absolutely value. And I also just don't want people to be scared, as far as doing the work, because on the other side of fear is its true power, its true clarity, it's reattaching to your soul self, your heart self, and really how you want to feel every day. So if anything that I talked about scares you, it probably is something to be a little bit curious about, but not to let it, push you so far that you don't want to tune into yourself, because it's the greatest gift that you can give yourself and the people that you love.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that, because it can be scary to look at your shit. It can be really scary, but on the other side of that is such clarity and groundedness and focus and happiness and really like connection to dharma and purpose. And one of the things that, you know, I was looking for before I started my healing journey, which I'm still on, by the way, don't have it right, done all the mistakes, did all the things, still stepping in shit. It's a journey and it's a practice. But one of the things, you know, before I started this was I wasn't really able to look at my shit. I didn't want to. And so you really do have to be called and feel called and ready to really work on self. And if you feel that call, definitely know that on the other side, there is bliss. And, and there's a lot of breakthroughs that can happen and it will change your life for the better. And I can say that confidently because I've been on the path and doing the work.
That's right.
And it sucks sometimes, but other times you just laugh it off and have a good time. And most of the time, you know, when you and I mean, we've shared a lot of containers together, many containers together where we've done some tough fucking shit. Sweat lodges, breathwork ceremonies, ecstatic dances. I mean, just things that can really, truly like move you to your core. And every single time I talk to you, we talk about the hard shit, but at the end, we're like laughing our asses off. And so I think that there's, for anyone that might be a little bit scared, it's like, no. It's freedom on the other side.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, I'm so happy that you just create this art in the world. It isn't art. It is your genius zone. It is your specialty. And I have so much more to learn from you. So I can't wait for you to come back on the show and we can chat about other deep neurological topics and and really, really dive into it. But I'm just so happy that you're here on the planet at this moment in time, just weaving all your magic into the world because I'm, you know, gulping it up with huge gulps. So thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for saying yes. And thank you for just creating magic in the world.
Yes. Same, sister. So much love.
Love you. Yeah. Well, we'll talk soon. Thank you everyone for listening to the Sacred Healing Podcast, and we'll see you next time.
I'm sorry. Please forgive me.